is red. Red like nothing I'd ever seen before. My boots are filling with seawater and blood, and I can't tell if it's mine or the kid next to me who's face down in the surf. The sound. God, the sound. It's like the world is tearing itself apart. Machine guns chattering death from those cliffs, mortars screaming down from heaven like Judgment Day itself. My name is James Patrick Sullivan. I'm 19 years old from a farm in Iowa, and I'm probably going to die on this beach in France. This is June 6, 1944. H-hour, Omaha Beach. And this is my story. But let me back up. Let me tell you how a farm boy from Cedar Rapids found himself in the belly of a landing craft, puking his guts out in the English Channel at 4:30 in the morning. 3 weeks ago, I was Jimmy Sullivan, replacement rifleman in the 1st Infantry Division, the big red one. Fresh out of training, green as Iowa corn in July. The older guys call me Farm Boy, and I didn't mind. Hell, I was proud of it. Back home, I could plow a field straighter than most men could walk a line. I figured that had to count for something. The sergeants have been drilling into us for months. This is it, boys. This is what we've been training for. Operation Overlord. The liberation of Europe starts with us. Liberation. That's what they called it. Sitting in that landing craft with 35 other scared kids, feeling like my stomach was trying to escape through my throat, it felt more like damnation. I remember looking around at the faces in that boat. There was Tommy Kowalski from Detroit, couldn't have been more than 18, still had acne scars on his cheeks. He was clutching a rosary his mother gave him, lips moving in silent prayer. Next to him sat Big Mike from Texas, hands steady as stone, checking his M1 Garand for the 100th time. And there was Lieutenant Morrison, barely older than the rest of us, trying to look confident while his hands shook like autumn leaves. The channel was rough that morning. Rougher than they'd predicted. General Eisenhower had delayed the invasion by 24 hours because of the weather, but June 6th wasn't much better. The landing craft pitched and rolled like a bucking bronco, and half the boys were seasick before we even got close to France. 30 minutes to beach, the coxswain shouted over the engine noise. That's when it hit me, really hit me, that this wasn't another training exercise. This was real. In half an hour, I'd either be fighting for my life on a beach in Normandy, or I'd be dead. I thought about my mother then, about the letters I'd written but never sent, about the girl back home, Sarah McKenzie, who'd promised to wait for me. I wondered if I'd ever see Iowa again, ever smell that rich black earth after a spring rain, ever help Dad bring in another harvest. The chaplain had said prayers before we loaded up. Into your hands, O Lord, we commend our spirits. But right then, cramped in that steel coffin with the smell of diesel fuel and vomit, I felt pretty sure the Lord had bigger things to worry about than one farm boy from Iowa. And then I saw something that froze me in my tracks. Through the small porthole in the side of the landing craft, I caught my first glimpse of the French coast. At first, it looked peaceful, just a thin line of bluff and beach in the gray dawn. But as we got closer, I could see the smoke. Thick, black columns rising into the sky where the Navy had been pounding the German position for the past hour. Jesus Christ, whispered Tommy Kowalski, pressing his face to another porthole. Look at all them ships. He wasn't wrong. I'd never seen anything like it in my life, and I never would again. The English Channel was carpeted with vessels as far as the eye could see. Battleships with guns the size of grain silos. Cruisers. Destroyers. And hundreds, maybe thousands, of landing craft just like ours, all heading for the same stretch of sand. The USS Texas was out there somewhere, her 14-inch guns sending shells the size of small automobiles into the German fortifications. Each time those big guns fired, you could feel the concussion in your chest, even from miles away. The whole ocean seemed to shudder. But the Germans weren't taking it lying down. As we got within a few miles of the beach, their artillery started reaching for us. Waterspouts erupted around the landing craft like deadly geysers. One shell landed close enough to our port side to soak us all with salt water. Keep your heads down. Lieutenant Morrison shouted, though there wasn't much choice in the cramped confines of the boat. Won't be long now. That's when the real fear set in. Not the butterflies in your stomach kind of fear you get before a big exam or asking a girl to dance. This was something primal, something that grabbed you by the throat and squeezed until you couldn't breathe. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold my rifle. Sergeant McBride, a veteran of North Africa with a face like weathered leather, crawled down the line of men. "Listen up, ladies," he barked. "In about 10 minutes, that ramp's gonna drop, and you're gonna run like your ass is on fire. Don't bunch up. Don't stop. Don't help the wounded. Your job is to get across that beach and take out those German sons of bitches." He stopped in front of me, those steel-gray eyes boring into mine. "Sullivan, you hear me, farm boy?" "Yes, Sergeant." I managed to croak out. "Good, 'cause I'd hate to have to explain to your mama why her boy came all the way to France just to get his head blown off in the surf." The engines changed pitch. We were slowing down, getting into position. Through the portholes, I could see other landing craft spreading out in a line, like a cavalry charge, except we were charging into the ocean instead of across a field. The beach was getting clearer now. Omaha Beach, though we just called it the beach then. It was about 6 miles long, stretching between two headlands. The sand looked white from a distance, almost inviting. But I could see the obstacles now. The hedgehogs, those steel and concrete triangles designed to rip the bottom out of landing craft. The wooden stakes with mines attached. The barbed wire. And above it all, those cliffs. Bluff Point to the east, the Vierville draw straight ahead. The Germans had turned them into fortresses. I could see the concrete bunkers, the gun emplacements, the observation posts. They had a perfect view of everything we were about to do. An 88mm shell screamed overhead, so close I could feel the wind from it. It exploded in the water behind us, sending up a column of water and steel fragments. Another landing craft about 50 yards to our right took a direct hit. 1 second it was there, full of American boys heading to France. The next second, it was just debris and bodies floating in the choppy water. "Holy Mary, Mother of God," Tommy whispered, his rosary beads clicking faster now. Big Mike was checking the action on his M1 for what must have been the 1,000th time. "Just another day at the office, boys," he said, but his voice was tight. The coxswain was shouting something to Lieutenant Morrison, pointing toward the beach. I couldn't hear what he was saying over the noise, but I could guess. We were getting close. Real close. And then the bottom of the landing craft scraped against sand, and everything changed. The grinding sound of a landing craft's bottom hitting the sandbar is something that still wakes me up at night, 79 years later. It was the sound of no turning back. "This is it," Lieutenant Morrison yelled, moving toward the ramp. "Remember your training. Move fast, stay low," and the ramp dropped. What I saw in that split second before hell broke loose will be burned into my memory until the day I die. The beach stretched out in front of us, maybe 300 yards of open sand between us and the seawall. It should have been empty, pristine. Instead, it looked like the surface of some alien planet. Bodies. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Boys from the first wave, cut down before they'd made it 50 yards. Some floating face down in the surf, others twisted in unnatural positions on the sand. Equipment scattered everywhere, rifles, packs, helmets, pieces of men I didn't want to think about. And the noise. Dear God, the noise. Every German machine gun in France seemed to be firing at once. The MG-42s, we called them Hitler's buzzsaws because of the sound they made. 1,200 rounds per minute, tearing through anything in their path. Mixed in was the crack of rifle fire, the whistle of mortars, the screams of wounded men calling for their mothers. "Go! Go! Go!" Sergeant McBride was pushing men off the ramp. "Don't stop. Don't think. Just run." Lieutenant Morrison went first. He made it exactly 3 steps before a burst from an MG-42 caught him in the chest. I watched him spin around and fall backward into the water, his blood mixing with the foam. Tommy Kowalski was next. The kid from Detroit who'd been praying with his rosary. He jumped off the ramp, landed in water up to his waist, took 2 steps toward the beach, and just disappeared. A mortar shell landed right where he'd been standing. When the water settled, there was nothing left. Then it was my turn. I jumped off that ramp into water, so cold it felt like needles driving into my skin. The weight of my equipment, rifle, ammunition, pack, everything tried to drag me under. The water was deeper than it looked up to my chest and rough. Every step was a struggle, fighting the current, fighting the weight, fighting the paralyzing fear that any second a bullet would find me. To my right, Big Mike from Texas was wading forward, his rifle held high over his head. "Come on, Sullivan," he shouted. "Ain't nothing but a bunch of scared krauts." Then a machine gun burst caught him. I saw the bullets walking across the water toward him like someone was throwing stones. They hit him in the stomach, the chest, the face. Big Mike, who'd seemed indestructible, who'd kept us all calm with his jokes and his steady hands, went down without another word. I was alone in that churning, bloody water. Alone except for the dead and the dying and the other kids who were just as scared and lost as I was. A mortar round landed in the water 20 feet to my left. The concussion knocked me sideways, filled my mouth and nose with salt water. I came up gasping, spitting, somehow still holding my rifle. My helmet was gone. My pack felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "Keep moving! Keep moving!" someone was screaming. I think it was me. The water was getting shallower, but that just made me a better target. The Germans in those bunkers on the bluff had a perfect field of fire. Every step I took, I expected to feel the impact of bullets, expected to go down like so many others already had. There's a kid ahead of me, maybe 50 yards closer to the beach. He was crawling on his hands and knees through the surf, dragging one leg behind him. Blood was streaming from his head, turning the water around him pink. I started toward him, remembering what my Sunday school teacher used to say about helping others. "Don't stop for the wounded." Sergeant McBride's voice cut through the chaos. He was somewhere behind me, somehow still alive, still pushing men forward. "You stop, you die. Keep moving." It went against everything I'd been taught, everything I believed about doing right by your fellow man. But I could see he was right. Every man who stopped to help the wounded became a target. The Germans in those bunkers weren't showing mercy, and they weren't giving us time to show it. I waded past the wounded kid. He looked up at me as I passed, his eyes pleading. He couldn't have been more than 17. I still see that face sometimes in dreams. The beach was getting closer now. I could see individual stones, pieces of driftwood, shell craters in the sand. I could also see the obstacles more clearly, the hedgehogs and steel beams, some with bodies draped over them like laundry hung out to dry. 50 yards from shore, I finally caught a break. A landing craft from the first wave had been hit and had drifted sideways, creating a small pocket of dead space where the German gunners couldn't quite reach. 3 other soldiers were crouched behind it, using it as cover. I half ran, half swam toward them, diving behind the wrecked boat, just as another burst of machine gun fire stitched across the water where I'd been standing. "Welcome to France, kid," one of them said. He was older than me, maybe 25, with corporal stripes on what was left of his uniform. Blood was seeping through a bandage on his left arm. Name's Danny Rossetti, 29th Infantry Division. "You?" "James Sullivan, 1st Infantry." I gasped, trying to catch my breath. "Big Red One." "Well, Jimmy from the Big Red One, I got some good news and some bad news. The good news is we ain't dead yet. The bad news is we got about 200 yards of open beach between us and anything that looks like cover, and every German in France is waiting for us to make a run for it." I looked toward the shore. He was right. The beach stretched out like a killing field, flat as a tabletop except for the craters. At the far end, maybe 300 yards away, was a seawall about 4 feet high. Beyond that, the bluff rose up another 150 feet to where the German bunkers waited like stone eyes, watching everything. Bodies lay scattered across the sand. Some moving, some not. Equipment floated in the surf, rifles, packs, pieces of landing craft, things I didn't want to identify. How many waves have gone in? I asked. You're looking at what's left of the first 2 waves, Rossetti said grimly. Been a real massacre. But the word is they're still sending more boats. This whole thing's turning into a goat rope. And then I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was the sound of more landing craft engines, getting closer. The 3rd wave was coming in, whether we were ready or not. Ah, hell, muttered one of the other soldiers crouched behind our makeshift cover. They're gonna pile more boys right on top of us. Through the smoke and spray, I could see them, maybe 20 more landing craft approaching the beach. Each one packed with 30 or 40 American boys who had no idea what they were about to walk into. We gotta move, Rossetti said, checking his rifle. Can't stay here. Those boats need someplace to land, and we're in the way. That's when I heard a voice that cut through all the chaos like a knife through butter. Loud, commanding, and madder than a wet cat. What the hell are you boys doing taking a coffee break? This ain't Coney Island. Get your asses up that beach. I turned around and couldn't believe what I saw. Standing waist-deep in the bloody surf, seemingly oblivious to the bullets snapping around him, was a colonel. An actual, honest-to-God, full colonel, with silver eagles on his helmet and a .45 pistol in his hand. Later, I found out it was Colonel George Taylor of the 16th Infantry Regiment. But right then, all I knew was that this crazy officer was standing in the middle of shooting gallery, calmly giving orders like he was on a parade ground back in the States. 2 kinds of people are staying on this beach, he shouted at a group of men huddled behind a beach obstacle. The dead and those who are going to die. Now move your asses. And you know what? It worked. Something about seeing that officer standing there, not caring about the bullets, not caring about the mortars, made the rest of us feel like maybe we could do this thing after all. You heard the man, Rossetti said, chambering around. Time to go. We went over the top of that wrecked landing craft like we were charging enemy trenches. The machine guns opened up immediately, but this time I didn't stop. Didn't think. Just ran. The sand was harder than I expected, churned up by explosions and soaked with seawater and blood. My boots kept slipping, but I stayed upright. To my left, a kid I didn't know stumbled and fell. I started to turn toward him, but remembered Sergeant McBride's words. Keep moving. Don't stop. 30 yards. 50 yards. A mortar round landed close enough to shower me with sand and stones. The concussion knocked me sideways, but I kept my feet. Fire and movement, someone was shouting. Fire and movement. It was basic infantry tactics. Some men shoot while others advance, then switch. But it was hard to coordinate when you couldn't hear orders over the gunfire, when half the men who'd started the advance were already down. I dropped behind a steel beach obstacle and tried to spot the German positions. There, a machine gun nest about halfway up the bluff, maybe 400 yards away. I could see the muzzle flash, the gunners crouched behind their weapon. I lined up my sights and squeezed the trigger. The M1 Garand kicked against my shoulder, and I worked the bolt, firing again. I had no idea if I hit anything, but at least I was shooting back. Sullivan. It was Rossetti, 20 yards to my right. See that draw up ahead? I looked where he was pointing. About 100 yards up the beach, there was a break in the bluff, a narrow valley that led up from the sand toward the cliff top. If we could reach it, we'd have some cover from the machine guns. That's our ticket out of here, he shouted. Pass the word. We started moving again in short rushes. Run 10 yards, hit the dirt, shoot at anything that looked German, then run again. It was terrifying and exhausting, but it was working. Slowly, yard by bloody yard, we're making progress. The seawall, when I finally reached it, was like a gift from heaven. 4 feet of concrete between me and the German guns. I threw myself against it and lay there gasping, hardly believing I was still alive. Other men were arriving, singly and in small groups. Some from my unit, some from a 29th Division, some I didn't recognize at all. We were all mixed up, but nobody cared about unit integrity. We were just Americans, and we were still breathing. "How many we got?" asked a sergeant I didn't know. I counted heads. Maybe 30 men stretched along a 100-yard section of seawall. Not many, considering how many had started the day. "Enough," said Colonel Taylor, appearing out of nowhere like a ghost. His uniform was torn and bloody, but his eyes were still fierce. "Enough to get the job done." He pointed toward the draw that Rossetti had spotted earlier. "That's the Vierville draw. There's a road up there that leads to the village. Take that road, and we can get off this damn beach." "What about the bunkers, sir?" asked the sergeant. Taylor grinned, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Son, those bunkers are what's keeping us pinned down here. Time to return the favor." He pulled out a map, somehow kept dry despite everything we'd been through. "Intelligence says there's a German strong point right at the mouth of the draw. Probably a company-sized force, with machine guns and mortars. We're going to have to take it the hard way." The hard way. As if there'd been an easy way to any of this. But you know what? Looking at the faces of the men around me, dirty, scared, but still determined, I felt something I hadn't felt since jumping off that landing craft. Hope. We made it across the beach. We were still alive, and now we had a chance to strike back. "All right, boys," Colonel Taylor said, checking his pistol. "Let's go show these Krauts what Americans can do." And then he did something that still gives me chills when I think about it. He stood up, right there on that beach, with German snipers and machine gunners watching every move. Colonel Taylor stood up on top of that seawall like he was taking a Sunday stroll. "Follow me," he shouted, and started walking toward the draw. Not running. Walking. Like he had all the time in the world. The rest of us looked at each other like he'd lost his mind. But then Sergeant Rossetti shook his head and grinned. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, and went over the wall after the colonel. One by one, we followed. 30 scared, exhausted American boys, following a crazy officer into the mouth of hell. The draw was a natural cut in the bluff, maybe 50 yards wide at the beach end, narrowing as it climbed toward the cliff top. The Germans had turned it into a killing zone. Machine gun positions on both sides, mortars pre-ranged on every approach, barbed wire and mines everywhere. But they'd made one mistake. They'd expected us to come charging up the middle, straight into their guns. Instead, Colonel Taylor led us along the base of the bluff, using the shadows and the irregular ground for cover. "There," he whispered, pointing up the slope. "See that concrete emplacement? That's their command post. Take that out, and the rest will fold." I could see it, a low concrete bunker, maybe halfway up the draw, with gun slits facing the beach. Every few seconds, I could see muzzle flashes from inside as they fired down at the men still trapped on the sand. "How do we get up there, sir?" asked a kid who looked younger than me, if that was possible. Taylor smiled that grim smile again. "We climb." The slope was steep, maybe 40 degrees, covered with loose rocks and scraggly bushes. Under normal circumstances, it would have been a tough climb. With German machine guns trying to kill us every step of the way, it seemed impossible. But we started up anyway, moving from rock to rock, bush to bush, anything that offered cover. The Germans spotted us pretty quick and started dropping mortar shells all around us. The explosions sent rocks bouncing down the slope like deadly hail. I was about halfway up when I heard a scream behind me. One of the 29th Division boys had taken a bullet in the leg. He was rolling back down the slope, leaving a trail of blood on the rocks. "Keep going. Colonel Taylor shouted. Don't stop for anything." It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, leaving that wounded boy behind. But I could see the logic. If we stopped, we'd all end up dead or wounded. The only way to help him was to take out that German strongpoint. 20 yards from the bunker, we ran into the wire. Thick coils of German barbed wire, strung between steel posts, some of it electrified. In the middle of it, we could see the dull glint of mine casings. "Bangalore torpedoes!" someone shouted. 2 men came forward with the long metal tubes packed with explosives. They shoved them under the wire, yelled "Fire in the hole!" and set them off. The explosion tore a gap in the wire wide enough for a man to crawl through. Colonel Taylor went first, naturally. Then Rossetti. Then me. The bunker was bigger than it had looked from below. Thick concrete walls, steel doors, ventilation slits cut into the rock. I could hear voices inside, German voices shouting orders, coordinating their defense. "Grenades," Taylor whispered, pulling out a fragmentation grenade. On my signal, we each pulled our pins and waited. The colonel held up 3 fingers. 2. 1. Now. 6 American grenades went through those gun slits like deadly baseballs. The explosions inside the bunker were muffled but vicious. Then silence. Taylor kicked in the steel door and went inside, pistol first. The rest of us followed. What we found was carnage. 7 German soldiers, all dead or dying. Maps on the walls showing their defensive positions. Radio equipment still crackling with reports from other bunkers along the beach. But what really caught my attention was the view from the gun slits. Looking down at Omaha Beach from up here, I could see why it had been such a slaughter. The Germans had perfect fields of fire on every approach. They could see everything, shoot at everything. But not anymore. "Get on that radio," Taylor ordered one of the men who spoke some German. "Tell every bunker you can raise that this position has fallen. Tell them American reinforcements are landing by the thousands." It was a lie, of course. We had maybe 20 men left from our little assault force. But the Germans didn't know that. While we were consolidating our position, I could hear the sounds of battle changing down on the beach. The steady chatter of machine guns was more sporadic now. The mortar fire was shifting inland, away from the landing zones. "Sir," called the man on the radio, "I'm getting reports from other units." The Rangers took Point du Hoc. The 2nd Battalion broke through at Dog Green. There's even word that some of the DD tanks made it ashore. Colonel Taylor nodded grimly. "About time. Signal the beach. Tell them the Vierville draw is open. We're ready for the main force." Looking back down at that blood-soaked sand, I could see more landing craft approaching. But these weren't carrying scared boys anymore. These were reinforcements, men who knew the beachhead was secured, who could focus on the next objective instead of just surviving. We'd done it. Against all odds, against everything the Germans could throw at us, we'd punched a hole in their Atlantic wall. But the cost. By 1800 hours, 6 in the evening, Omaha Beach looked like something from Dante's Inferno. I was sitting on a piece of concrete from the destroyed German bunker, sharing a cigarette with Rossetti and watching the medics. They'd been at it for hours, moving from body to body, checking for signs of life, marking the dead with tags, loading the wounded onto stretchers. The numbers, when they finally came in, were staggering. Over 2,400 American casualties on Omaha Beach alone. That was just the confirmed count. There were bodies in the surf that might never be recovered, men blown to pieces by artillery shells, boys who'd simply vanished in the chaos. "You know what gets me?" Rossetti said, blowing smoke into the evening air. "Most of these kids never fired a shot. Never even got close enough to see a German." He was right. Looking down at the beach, I could see where the killing had been worst. A line of bodies maybe 50 yards from the water's edge, where the first wave had been cut down before they could even organize. Boys from Kansas and California and New York who trained together, shipped out together, and died together on a beach they'd never heard of 6 months ago. But we'd won. That was the thing that kept echoing in my head as I watched the sun setting over the English Channel. We'd actually won. The beach that had been a German fortress that morning was now an American supply depot. LSTs were unloading trucks and artillery pieces and cases of ammunition. Engineers were clearing mines and building roads. The CBs were already talking about constructing a temporary harbor. "Sullivan," a familiar voice made me turn around. It was Sergeant McBride, looking like he'd been dragged through hell backward. His uniform was torn and bloody, and he was limping on his left leg. But he was alive. "Sergeant, I thought you were dead." "Not hardly, far boy. Takes more than a bunch of crowds to put me down." He sat down heavily beside me. Heard you did good today. Colonel Taylor mentioned you specifically in his report. I didn't know what to say to that. Doing good seemed like the wrong phrase for a day when so many had died. How many from our company made it, Sergeant? McBride was quiet for a long moment. Out of 194 men who got on those landing craft this morning, 43 answered roll call tonight. 43 out of 194. Less than 1 in 4. I thought about Tommy Kowalski and his rosary beads. About Big Mike from Texas with his steady hands and his jokes. About Lieutenant Morrison, who died 3 steps off the landing craft. About the wounded kid I'd passed in the surf, whose eyes still haunted me. It don't seem fair, Sergeant. Fair. McBride spat in the sand. Son, there ain't nothing fair about war. Good men die, and sometimes bad men live. Sometimes the brave die first, and sometimes the cowards make it through. The only thing that matters is that we won. He pointed toward the cliffs, where American flags were now flying over German bunkers. See those colors up there? That's what those boys died for. Not for glory, not for medals, not for some politician's speech. They died so those flags could fly over free ground. As night fell over Omaha Beach, I could hear the sounds of the continuing war inland. Artillery fire, the distant chatter of machine guns, the rumble of tanks moving up the draws we'd fought so hard to open. The invasion was just beginning. But the hardest part was over. We had our foothold in Europe. We had our beach. I stayed on that concrete chunk until nearly midnight, watching the waves wash the sand clean, thinking about home and Sarah Mackenzie and whether my parents had heard the news yet. Thinking about the boys who wouldn't be going home, who'd never see Iowa corn grow tall again or dance with their girls at county fair. The medics were still working by lamplight, still checking bodies, still looking for signs of life among the dead. I watched them work and made myself a promise. I was going to live through this war. I was going to make it home. Not just for me, but for all the boys who couldn't. Tommy and Big Mike and Lieutenant Morrison and all the rest. I was going to live, and I was going to remember. That was 79 years ago. I'm 98 now, one of the last living veterans of D-Day. When young people ask me about that day, about what it was really like, I tell them what I've told you. It wasn't like the movies. It wasn't heroic or glorious or noble. It was terrifying and brutal and heartbreaking. Boys died calling for their mothers. Men were killed before they could fire a shot. The bravest among us fell first, and some of us who lived still wonder why we were spared. But it was necessary. That beach, that day, those boys who gave everything, it mattered. Not just for America, not just for the Allies, but for the idea that free people will stand up to tyranny, no matter the cost. I never became a hero. I was just a farm boy from Iowa who was scared out of his mind and somehow lived through the longest day. I went home after the war, married Sarah Mackenzie, raised 3 children, and grew corn on the same land my father had worked. But I never forgot Omaha Beach. I never forgot the sound of those MG-42s, or the weight of seawater in my boots, or the faces of the boys who didn't make it home. Every June 6th, I think about them. Every Memorial Day, I remember. And now, as one of the last to bear witness, I'm telling you. So you'll remember too. So those boys won't be forgotten. So their sacrifice won't be in vain. Freedom isn't free. It's paid for in blood and courage, and the lives of 19-year-old boys who would rather be home milking cows or playing baseball or holding their sweethearts. Remember that. Please, remember them all.